Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for Monday's edition of Alaska Weather on this 13th day of September 2021. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first on the hazards weather graphics, there are no watches, warnings, or advisories out public-wise anywhere around the state for the next day or so, probably longer. And from there, just going into satellite imagery, you can see low pressure tracking northward into the southwest interior. Stands out quite vividly there. And slowly moving northward, main center over the Yukon Delta, and it's more or less stalling out there for at least a short time. Front moving northward, mainly just clouds into the interior there with very little precipitation, just pretty light scattered stuff. For example, Northway picked up, I believe, 0.03 of an inch precipitation. Tok had 0.02 of an inch. And then it cuts off, and really not much of anything in the interior till you get back out toward the Seward Peninsula. And you get in a little bit more light rain there. Otherwise, some showers coming up Cook Inlet after a pretty extensive band of clearing skies that was over the Copper River Basin today. And that's where the gusty winds were, up to 45 miles an hour in Palmer. Actually, that was late last evening. They had 45 mile per hour wind gusts in advance of the front, 35 miles an hour this afternoon. And let's see, Delta Junction seeing gusts 45 miles an hour out of the southeast today. Copper River area with some sunshine along the Copper River, gusts to 35 miles an hour there, Gulkana, and those areas, Glen Allen. Otherwise, showers Prince William Sound, and heaviest rainfall about a half inch, a little over half an inch falling at Yakutat in the last 12 hours there, with Seward Peninsula picking up about half an inch of rain. That was about the heaviest amounts that I could find for that 12-hour period. Otherwise, 5 to 15 hundredths fell over Bristol Bay, and that's about it. St. Mary's, Bethel picked up only 2/100ths of an inch of precipitation. But up along the frontal boundary there, Koyuk, northeast Norton Sound, or actually Norton Bay, Koyuk had about 1/10 of an inch precipitation. And that's about it. Some clouds out over the Bering Sea brought 2/100ths of an inch to the Pribilof Islands. And Aleutian's not looking too bad today. Rolling that through again, you can see the front moving northward, mostly just clouds, as I mentioned, and kind of stalling out there, not making much more progress northward there as it becomes parallel to the wind flow, which is mostly out of the east, and that's going to mostly remain that way. And a little bit of light drizzle over the eastern Arctic coast on the chart. You can see that got a shower symbol there. Barter Island, Kaktovik area picked up 1/100th of an inch of very light rain or just thick dew in the fog. And that may expand along the Arctic coast, chance of that tonight into tomorrow, all the way down into the Bering Strait. There, some of that moisture wraps back into the northern Bering Sea across the Seward Peninsula. Otherwise, on the chart today, again, heaviest rainfall amounts, North Gulf Coast from the southern Seward Peninsula to about Yakutat, lighter into the Panhandle, and pretty gusty northwest winds now east of the Pribilofs and just off the southwest coast, and kind of breezy day across Kodiak Island. And for tonight, that'll continue. Maybe some clearing there for Kodiak. Showers chances continue for the southern part of the island there. Windy and wet for Bristol Bay, and damp for the Kuskokwim Delta. Yukon Delta may dry out, just isolated showers there. More extensive shower pattern there for the Kuskokwim Valley into the western Alaska Range, but the interior staying mostly dry, just isolated showers possible there. Eagle over up into the Koyukuk Valley, and then stays wet and unsettled for the North Gulf Coast and the northern Panhandle through tonight. High pressure ridging brings a break into the eastern Bering Sea, eastern Aleutians tonight. Next front spreading rain and increasing winds into the western Aleutians toward Adak late tonight, toward morning. And then we'll see the day on Tuesday. Low pressure continues, kind of edges eastward, but continues to weaken there over the lower Yukon River area. Say moves to about the Kuskokwim Mountains, and that's going to keep Bristol Bay occasionally wet and breezy with showers all the way down to at least Port Hayden, and then ends for the areas back to the south. But then moisture spreading up ahead of that warm front brings a chance of light rain into Falls Pass in the afternoon. Periods of rain for the eastern Aleutians. And over to Adak and Atka, all the way up to Shimmy and Attu there with the possible gale force winds in advance of that frontal boundary. And the Panhandle, other trough, heaviest rain in the north, more showery toward the south, and the interior, mostly dry. Moving ahead to the day on, the forecast for Wednesday. We've got now the low pretty much weakens out, the remaining one there just east of the Seward Peninsula. So through the interior, western interior, stays cloudy with showers, and southern Alaska, surges of moisture coming northward there, southerly flow around the high south of the Queen Charlottes, and ahead of the next system approaching Kodiak and Bristol Bay. Brings moderate amounts of rain, possibly to the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula Aleutian Range. Low clouds, fog, and drizzle, the rule, and in some cases getting a little breezy there over the central Aleutians with gale force winds actually in the forecast out that way with that tighter gradient. And northern Bering a little better, but still a lot of low clouds, fog, and drizzle. Same thing for the western and eastern Arctic coast. And then again, a trough brings rain and showers, keeps it cloudy into south central or southern Alaska actually, North Gulf Coast into the northern central Panhandle. And then the main rain area back toward Kodiak Island overspreading Bristol Bay during the afternoon hours with increasing winds coming up to about 30 knots or so. Small craft advisories, Kodiak Island there. And a little brisk for Bristol Bay as well in the afternoon. And for temperatures, lows tonight up over the southern interior, upper 30s Copper River Basin, otherwise in the 40s. And mid-40s Kodiak Island, mid to upper 40s for the Panhandle, highs on Tuesday afternoon. Lower to mid-50s everywhere, including Bristol Bay, except Kodiak Island, upper 50s, maybe near 60, possible sunshine there. Same thing for the southern Panhandle, otherwise lower to mid-50s. Followed by lows Wednesday morning, not much different than tomorrow morning. Mid-30s Copper River Basin, otherwise 40 to 45, just about everywhere else. Upper 40s for the southeast coastal areas, especially along the coast, followed by highs again. Lower to mid-50s, mid-50s Kodiak, and upper 50s Prince of Wales Island there, lower 50s Juneau on up to Skagway. And up to the north, lows tonight still staying above freezing, mid-30s, mid to upper 30s, North Slope Arctic coast into the Brooks Range, south of the mountains, upper 30s to lower 40s. And then highs tomorrow, 50s, lower 50s west, or actually mid-40s, St. Lawrence Island and the western Seward Peninsula to 50 to 55 western interior, then 55 to 60 from Fairbanks eastward, near 40 along the Arctic coast, central Arctic coast, and then lows upper 30s, mid to upper 30s to lower 40s, all in the interior there with falling back into the 30s, maybe a shade below freezing over toward the eastern interior from Northway Tok on up to Eagle. That'll be followed by highs in the upper 50s, 55 to 60, implying some sunshine there for much of the central and eastern interior, cooler out to the west. Hitting southwest, lows tonight, 40s for the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. Lower to mid-50s for your highs, and then lows again the Wednesday morning time frame, anywhere from 40, Savunga and Gamble, to the mid-40s for the Pribilof Islands, upper 40s for the Aleutians, near 50 around Cold Bay, or 45 to 50 for the Alaska Peninsula, followed by highs in the lower to mid-50s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather, IFR, Central Eastern Arctic Coast, Central Eastern North Slope, Central Eastern Brooks Range, north of the mountains there, but south, VFR, Central Interior, along the Alaska Range, pick up marginal VFR, and then the eastern slopes of the northwestern Alaska Range, IFR, Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, IFR eastward to near Elfin Cove, marginal VFR over the northern quarter of the Panhandle, VFR to the south, and a narrow band of VFR there across the Pribilofs down to Unalaska Island, Alaska Peninsula, Shelikof Strait, marginal, otherwise Kodiak VFR, Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, marginal VFR, and IFR, Bristol Bay, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta on up to the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, most of the northern Bering Sea, western central Aleutians, from Adak on out, westward, IFR. For the afternoon for Tuesday afternoon, IFR, northern Bering Sea through the Bering Strait, Cape Lisburne, Point Hope, and much of the Arctic coast and North Slope. Brooks Range southward into the interior, VFR, marginal VFR, southern interior, the areas of IFR scattered in the upslope areas, and mostly marginal for the Panhandle, IFR, southwest coast to the southwest mountains and to at least the southern Kuskokwim range there. And IFR continues, mostly Unmak Island, westward to Adak, back up and around down to Shimei and Attu. And for Wednesday morning, more IFR out over the Bering Sea, larger area, and that two bands extend down to the Alaska Peninsula and the west central Aleutians, Kisk Island, Adak, and IFR across the southwest interior, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, Norton Sound, eastward to the Alaska Range, some of that spilling into western Cook Inlet, IFR, Prince William Sound, and eastern North Gulf Coast, marginal VFR, Yakutat, in across the Panhandle, IFR, North Slope and Arctic Coast to the Bering Strait, and that breaks out in the Bering Strait to marginal VFR, same thing for the Seward Peninsula, Kotzebue Sound, Northwest Coast, IFR, Cape Lisburne, western North Slope to the central Arctic coast. VFR, though, for the eastern Arctic coast, there with North Slope VFR and VFR across the central eastern Brooks Range all the way down to the Alaska Range. And then areas of mostly marginal for south central Alaska, IFR holding there in Prince William Sound and locally into the Coast Range Mountains. But VFR for the Panhandle, IFR, Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, much of the Bering Sea, but some VFR for Adak. And passes Anatuvik, IFR, northern approach, marginal through the pass, better conditions south, VFR. Same pattern for Adigan, VFR southern entrance and IFR out the north side. Lake Clark and Merrill, lowest conditions will be found on the western approach of both passes, possibly IFR. Same pattern for Rainy as well with the westerly flow. IFR or lowest flying conditions on the western side, better off to the east and through the pass. Windy, marginal VFR, but VFR out the north entrance into the valley. Isabel, marginal VFR to VFR. And Mentasta, VFR, possible marginal VFR, southern approach. And for, Tanita, marginal VFR at times throughout the day Tuesday. And Portage, IFR to start, and then becoming marginal probably by midday through the afternoon. Chilkoot and White, marginal VFR. Freezing level 6,000 feet up from along the Brooks Range and North Slope to the eastern Arctic coast, and a little bit cooler down over the central southern Bering Sea, about 4,000 feet extending into Bristol Bay, and then about 6,000 to 8,000 feet over the central western Aleutians, and roughly 5,000 to 6,000 feet over the Panhandle and much of the interior. And for icing, areas of isolated moderate rime icing up across the northern valleys there south of the Brooks Range, and anywhere over central and southern Alaska there from the southwest coast eastward across the Copper River Basin, Panhandle. Drier, though, out over the Bering Sea. A couple of bands out there, really not too significant, even though they drag across the Alaska Peninsula and Unalaska Island. Jet stream, easterlies 65 knots there through the central interior, and then westerlies up to 95 knots coming across the Alaska Peninsula, and main jet south of the Panhandle, as well as near or just south of the Aleutians. 9,000 feet, west 40 knots, Bristol Bay, 50 knots over the central Aleutians, and strongest winds again in those areas at 3,000 feet, translating into considerable moderate chop, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, and all of the Aleutians. And after the break, I'll be back with a look at the marine forecasts.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Carrie Haisley, Chief of the Emergency Services and Multimedia Branch for the National Weather Service in Anchorage. With me today I have Dr. Doug Wesley, a physical scientist for the National Weather Service Alaska Region Headquarters. Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Carrie. Hello.
Hello. So you're here to talk to us a little bit about something called AKwx, which is the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And I understand that AKwx is a network of volunteers who take weather observations. Can you tell us a little bit more about what AKwx is?
Yes, it began in the lower 48, 20 some years ago, and it's expanded during those 2 decades. They're getting something like 10 to 15,000 rainfall reports per day from the lower 48.
Wow, that's a lot of different reports. So, how many reports do we get in Alaska right now?
Well, it varies, maybe 10 to 25. But if you consider the large areas we're talking about, we have a lot of gaps to fill. Any observation is better than no observation, but there are large areas in Alaska. Alaska covers 3 million square miles. There's a lot of data gaps in that space, so we'd like to enhance it.
Sure. So, tell us then a bit about why these observations are so important to Alaska and why we need to expand the number of them that we're getting.
Yes, Alaska, as you know, has large areas with a lot of complex terrain, and there are no weather observing stations or radar. So CoCoRaHS can help fill the data gaps, so you can at least get some idea of what's actually falling from the sky at those locations. CoCoRaHS increases the amount of timely weather observations available to meteorologists and other decision makers, especially in hazardous type of weather, both rain and snow and the occasional hailstorm that we get up here. CoCoRaHS observations can help forecasters identify long-term precipitation and snowfall trends in a climate sense. And just overall, they increase the amount of timely weather observations available to the public.
So, then let's talk a little bit about each of the different types of observations. So, it's the rain, hail, and snow network. So, let's start by talking a little bit about rain observations and tell us a little bit about how you take those and how long it takes a volunteer to get a rain observation.
Okay, this is a 4-inch gauge, just the basic gauge, which you use for both rain and snowfall. But the rain observations are pretty quick. It's a matter of 2 or 3 minutes that each volunteer goes out and takes a reading, and then they enter these on the computer, and they're immediately available for observation on the computer and on the maps, so that you can see your report. In the wintertime, it's a little bit more complicated. We require the observers to measure not only the snow accumulation, but also liquid equivalent. So they've got to melt the snowfall. This involves 2 of these gauges and a snowboard. And it's maybe a 10-minute observation per day during the winter. But the snowfall is so variable that even across town and in especially the remote areas, it's crucial that we increase this number of snow observations in the network.
Right. I understand that we can only take observations in places where we have weather service offices. And so we rely on all of these volunteers to help us fill gaps. And it's also interesting to know how snowfall varies across like large spaces or even small cities. So I notice here in Anchorage, for example, we can have a vastly different amount of snow on the east side of town and the west side of town. And so it seems like these observations would help us to better understand what's going on in places besides just where the office is.
That's correct. In any given snowfall, there are typically large variances, as you know, and we rely on reports from the public and from National Weather Service cooperative spotters to map out the snowfall that occurs so that we can predict it better in the future.
Sure. So we talked about rain observations and we talked about snow observations. And you said for each of those, if it's rain, it only takes a couple minutes and then it can take about 10 minutes if it's snow. Hail was the other one that we didn't talk about yet. Tell us just a little bit about the hail observations that CoCoRaHS observers take.
Yeah, the CoCoRaHS network, it has a hail pad, and it's just a simple block of styrofoam covered with aluminum foil, and you can approximate the size of hail by measuring the dent that the hail causes on the pad, and this can give us an estimate of hail size. We don't get hail very often in Alaska, but I've seen it 2 or 3 times in my 5 years in Anchorage, and some of it up to a ½ inch, and I'm sure there's been larger hail up in the interior at times.
So let's talk a little bit about how these rain, hail, and snow observations can help forecasters. So we have people who forecast the weather, and we also have people who work on the hydrology side, and I can see that maybe CoCoRaHS will be beneficial to both of them. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, it's beneficial to the hydrologic forecaster who's concerned about flooding, and rainfall comprises one of the causes of a flood, or it can exacerbate high water conditions. So the more the hydrologist has to look at in terms of data from recent rainfall, the more information they have to work with when they're generating a forecast. The weather forecasters in the wintertime at the Weather Service office can use these observations also to help with past case studies, to verify model data, and to get a handle on what's actually happening out the window. And that's important in the forecast process.
Yeah, it seems like you can never have too much information when you're issuing a forecast. So it only takes a few minutes most of the time to take these observations. So let's say I'm interested in becoming a volunteer for CocoRa's. How do I get involved?
Yeah, the website is very useful, cocoras.org, and it has a number of video-based training tutorials that take you right on from measuring rainfall to a video tutorial on measuring snowfall. It has the maps available in real time, and you can go back and look at that old data too through those maps. And so it's a very useful, comprehensive website.
Very interesting. And anybody can get involved, right? You don't have to be a meteorologist.
That's right. And, we love to have 24, once a day reports throughout the year, but if you can't, then so be it. And we have observers, some observers are out of town for periods of time, or maybe they can only report, a week or two of precipitation, but it's still useful. It's still data that we look at. So the more the better, but you can get involved even if you aren't at a location 24/7.
Doug, I really appreciate you coming on to our program today to talk about CocoRa's. Hopefully we can have you back in the studio at some point so we can talk more about it and then talk more about the different types of observations and the tools that observers use.
That would be great. Yeah.
So thank you for your time, and thank you so much for joining this edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Analysis, not much to show here. The ice well off the Arctic coast there, and definitely won't be any big jogs to the south or anything coming on shore for the next week or so. It'll just be kind of drifting around with whichever way the winds blow along with the currents. So moving on to the coastal water forecast, we've got west winds, southern coast of the Panhandle, 15 to 20 knots, seas around 10 feet. West-southwest winds 15 to 20 on the north coast, and small craft advisories for Lynn Canal. South winds 25 knots, seas 5 feet. South at 20 for Stevens Passage. Pretty light for Clarence Strait, southeast at 10, seas 2 feet. And for Wednesday, central northern inside water, southerlies 10 to 15 knots, 2 to 3 foot seas. And for Clarence Strait, southwest breeze at 10 knots. West winds along the Arctic coast. On the north coast, out of 10 to 15 knots with seas at 8 feet. And then south coast 15 to 20 knot winds with 9 foot seas. And for Prince William Sound, east winds 15 knots for the day Tuesday. Cook Inlet, south to southwest, south to southwest winds at 10 to 15 knots, 3 to 4 foot seas. Southwest 15 for Kamishak Bay. And the North Gulf Coast, southwest winds 20 knots, seas around 10 feet. But small craft advisories for the Barren Islands for southwest winds at 25. And for the day Wednesday, Prince William Sound, southeast at 15. Same thing for northern Cook Inlet, 20 knots so south of the Forelands. And then small craft advisories now, Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, southeast 30 knots, seas building toward 10 feet. And small craft advisories for the North Gulf Coast, south to southeast, 25 knot winds coming into the picture there. And then for the Kodiak Island area tomorrow, west-southwest, 30 knots, seas 10 feet. Gale warnings for Bristol Bay, west winds 35 knots with 13-foot seas. And small craft advisories, the Alaska Peninsula, on up to Sitkinak from Cape Sarachev, and the Bering Sea side of the peninsula there, west, 25 to 30 knots, seas anywhere from 9 to 13 feet. Outlook for Wednesday, Kodiak Island, small craft advisories there, south to southeast, 20 to 25 knots. Small craft advisories for the Alaska Peninsula. Strongest on the Pacific side will be out of the southwest at 30 knots. Otherwise, 25 knot winds. 25 knot winds for Bristol Bay from the east, and seas at about 5 feet. For the Aleutians, on Alaska Island, south winds 20 knots. Unmak Island, small craft advisory, south to southeast 25 to 30 knots. Adak and Atka, south at 30, and southerlies or southwesterlies at 30 knots, all the way out to Shimian at 2. And then some gales coming into the picture on Wednesday. West-northwest, 35 to 40 knots, western Aleutians. Flat out 40 knots from the west for Adak and Atka, seas just under 20 feet, and 30 to 35 knot winds from the west and southwest for the Fox Islands, seas running 14 to 16 feet. Southwest coast, west winds 30 knots, seas 10 to 13 feet. Pribilofs west at 15, 7-foot seas. Small craft advisories for the St. Matthew Island and St. Lawrence Islands for 25 knot winds. Light winds out of the eastern Norton Sound. And for Wednesday, Norton Sound, northeast at 10, seas 3 feet. Small craft advisories for St. Lawrence Island, north 25, seas 6 feet. And northeast at 20 for the Yukon Delta coast, South and Nunivak Island, small craft advisories. Also for the Pribilofs and St. Matthew Island for east and northeast winds at 25 knots with 7 to 9 foot seas. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, kind of a breeze at 15 to 20 knots with 3 to 4 foot seas and 15 knot northeast winds. For the central and western coast, 20 knot winds from Cape Beaufort to Cape Thompson. Small craft advisories from Cape Thompson to Wales for north winds at 25 knots. And those drop back to about 20 knots there from Wales to Cape Beaufort out of the north. North winds 15, western Arctic coast, northeast at 10 on the central coast. Variable to south, 10 knots with 2 foot seas or less for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. For tonight, some fog and drizzle occurring on the eastern Arctic coast now. Might increase and spread west and a little southwest into the north slope, and amounts will be light. And low pressure almost stationary over the Yukon Delta will keep it breezy and occasionally wet along the southwest coast, and especially over the Kuskokwim Delta into Bristol Bay. To a lesser effect for the Kuskokwim Valley, and even less, but still chance of showers move through at the trough, North Gulf Coast, south central Alaska. Showery from the northern panhandle, tapering off in the south, and mostly dry over the interior north of the Alaska Range. That persists into Tuesday as well. Probably see some clearing at times over the central interior, some scattered showers, maybe the Kobuk-Koyukuk Valley area, but nothing significant. Low clouds, fog, and drizzle. Arctic coast into the Bering Strait to St. Lawrence Island. Next storm bringing breezy conditions and rain into the Aleutians. On Wednesday, it moves east.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.